Hello and welcome to Josh Talks. I'm Joshua McClellan and I'm here with Nathan Hanley. Nathan's had a very successful career in the Irish League. How are you today, Nathan?
I'm good, thanks, Josh. And just before we get started, thanks very much for inviting me on today. Hopefully we'll get a good conversation between each other.
Yeah, that's no problem. So, I think the first question is, how did you first start playing football?
I suppose like many young boys, probably came from a big brother who's 14 years older than me, and my dad. They were both football people as such. Played football in their youth, and supported Manchester United. So I would have started playing football on the street. So I would have when I was probably 6 year old, and early on, I probably found that I was maybe as good as, or even probably better than kids my age, and I started playing with kids that were slightly older. So I did. So I was 6 year old, and I was maybe playing with kids that were in P7 or first and second year, and I think I remember maybe my mum and dad, especially my mum, buying me about two or three different watches to try and say, you've got to be home for 5:30. And I was always missing my tea and dinner to play football with my mates.
Yeah, that's always the most important, like especially starting young as playing out in the street and getting as much practice in as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And, I suppose, I was born in 1990, so I turned 30 in July, and maybe I was in around our age, or maybe the last kids that would have knocked about the streets. And now when you probably see, when I've gone into coaching and stuff, we're actually trying to replicate the street footballer and the our kids, because they don't do unstructured play. So that's where basically I started playing football in the streets.
So, who was your first team then?
I signed for Carrick Rangers when I was 8 year old, and back then you didn't have the small set of games version, so I played 11v11 as an 8 year old, and I actually started off, funny enough, as a goalkeeper. My first game was in the Lisburn League, and we got beat 8-1, and that was my first and last ever competitive game in goals. So that was my introduction to competitive football.
So, I remember reading one of your articles and it said you moved to St Andrews.
Yep. Yeah. So again, probably for people who don't know who St Andrews were, they were a team based in the Shankill Road. So they were, well, more so Ballygamartin, where Albert Foundry play. And I was playing for Carrick Rangers in the Odyssey in a six-a-side tournament indoor. And we, as a team, we didn't do fantastic that day, but I think I did okay. And there was a guy called Joe Kincaid, who at that time was the regional scout for Rangers, and also that he was the academy director at St Andrews. So I got asked to go to Rangers. So I think at 10 year old, I went to Rangers with about 4 or 5 other boys. Some of them kids were Craig Cathcart, Trevor Carson, Ben Brown, who played in the Irish League, maybe one other kid, Mark Higginson. I don't think Mark went on to play, Irish League or anything, but he was a very, very good footballer. So yeah, at 10 year old, I went to Rangers, and then Joe had asked me to sign for St Andrews. And the big swaying move was that I was asked to go to America on a cross community trip to California for 3 weeks. So once the talk of a holiday to California came about, I was leaving Carrick to go to St Andrews. But in terms of the kids that have came through there, I remember playing a game in Europe for Linfield against a team called Batay Borisov, and there was actually, at the starting 11, there was 7 ex-St Andrews players. And I think in the squad that beat England 1-0 in 2005, I think there was maybe a guts of 7 or 8 kids that had, or 7 or 8 senior internationals that had came through that youth system, which nowadays, when you think about it, is literally unheard of, especially from a boys' club.
Yeah, I remember the first time I ever heard about St Andrews, I think it was from John Weir when he was talking about it. And then I remember I was working in a wee corner shop in Woodville, and there was a fella came in, I think he was in his 70s, and he just started talking about football in general, and he started talking about how good St Andrews were. And I think he must have been a part of it. And he talked about all the people who had went across the water and actually made a career for themselves out of it. I think one of the names he mentioned was Stephen Davis.
That's right, yeah. Stephen Davis, Stuart Elliott, the Feeneys, as I mentioned, Craig Cathcart, Robert Garrett, Jimmy Mulgrew. I think Alan Manus played a season. The Nixons, who had obviously really good Irish League careers. John Weir, who you mentioned. Countless, Ram McCann, Grant McCann. There was reams and reams of people there, people who I've missed out that, who went on to have, either very good careers in England or either here in the Irish League.
What do you think the big pull of St Andrews was? Why do you think that had so many good quality players going to it and then obviously pushing on for further things?
I think simply it was down to Joe Kincaid. I think he drove it. I think he had a vision. A lot of the skills and the way that we were taught was, yes, winning was important, but probably the way we played. And there was, I mean, when I remember a 10-year-old going to Rangers, and then once a month, at that stage, Rangers had a big affiliation with Holland because Dick Advocaat was a manager. So once a month, one of the Dutch fellas would have came over and coached us at Ballysullen Leisure Centre, and the stuff that they were doing with us was in the round with covert coaching, and which was basically a lot about ball manipulation and ball mastery skills.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the list of players that I've mentioned, all of which are technically decent. So not only were you being taught to win, but you're also taught to play the right way, and you were technically decent. So I think probably when I was 10, I think more so maybe those things you don't think about, but when you look back, you go, right, actually was given a really good football education at a really young age.
So how long were you actually at St Andrews for?
So I was there from under 10 right through to under 15, and then there's a natural ceiling point where then you go to either an English league club or an Irish league club. So they had an affiliation with Rangers at that time, and also Linfield. So when I was leaving at under 16, I was going into 5th year. So I went to Linfield for a year. So I played as an under 16, under 18s, and I also played in the Swiss that season.
Mm-hmm. Was there never any talk of St Andrews making like a first team, or people pushing on and playing for like a first team St Andrews to make adult football, or was it simply just try and push people on into the Irish League and further afield?
Honest answer, I'm not sure. I probably don't think so, because they would probably have had to enter amateur league status, start from the bottom, and move right up. So I don't think so. And I think probably that the type of player that they were producing were probably ready made for an apprenticeship or a YTS in England or Scotland or into Irish League, probably the vast majority going to Linfield.
So then after you were playing for Linfield and you were making reserve team appearances, what was the next step in your career?
Well, that season for Linfield was brilliant. I was the vast majority of the games I played for Linfield Swiss, and played with seasoned pros even at 15 and 16. Like say Winky Murphy, Jim Irvin, Greg Shannon played a lot of games for Linfield Swiss because he was number 2 to Alan Manus. Jim Irvin, just a list of names that as an Irish League follower, you were being, I suppose, exposed to experienced players and the way they went about their business. At the end of that season, so throughout that season, actually, I went to Hull City on trial 5 times, and at the end of the 5th trial, I'd got asked to sign an apprentice for him.
So how did that come about? Was Hull City scouts at the games, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so at that stage, my ex-manager at St Andrews, a guy called Stephen Seaton, was also the scout for Hull City. And I think simply they were looking for a left-sided player, and I suppose I was the right age. He must have thought it was good enough to go, and So that started off this, say, the August before I went to England, between August and the May or June, probably the May time, I went 5 times. So, sometimes, a club looks at someone once for 2 or 3 days when they go over there and they say, yeah, we're going to have a nibble on him. But they actually looked at me 5 different times and finally took the plunge.
So what were you doing when you went on trial with Hull? Were you just training with the squad and playing games among yourselves, or were you actually playing in like a match setting against other teams?
Is that when I was on trial at Hull?
On trial, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have played for their under 18s. So that would have been their first and second year scholars. So they would have been playing at that stage, they were a centre of excellence. So they weren't an academy. So they were playing against teams from the north east of England. So Grimsby, Scunthorpe, Rotherham, York City, Mansfield. So, I mean, on trial, I think I played against maybe Chesterfield, Grimsby. Mansfield was maybe another trial game I played. So, you were playing against probably the best kids in the round, the north east of England. And I suppose probably what the guys from Hull would always would have said, it would have been easier for them, and it is easier for them to sign local boys because there's less of an outlay in terms of finance. So not only do you have to be as good as, you've got to be better than what they already have because they're taking a bigger chance on you.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to Nathan Best about this, and he was at the Belfast Met Academy, and I think they were going across the water and playing teams, and they were getting results and they were beating teams. And one of their coaches came over and just said the exact same thing. It's easier for local kids to make it over there because there's no real money involved. You're not paying for accommodation or food.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. If you think about it, you've got to, consider paying the kids' digs. There might be a development fee involved with, the boys' club or the Irish League club that they're coming from. And I suppose it is just a cheaper option, as well as that. You've maybe had a kid there from age 9 or 10 that's came right through the system. What his behaviours, his attitudes, basically what you're getting, where you're only maybe seeing, a boy from Northern Ireland or Ireland or maybe Scotland, for a snippet of a time. So let's say a weekend or a week. And yes, you can't tell a lot from a kid within those time period, but it certainly doesn't. It's not the same as spending 5 years with someone.
So see if you look at the first trial you went on with Hull, and then just coming to the end of that, did you know that you were going back for a second trial, or was it a very much a waiting game?
No, well, the people at Hull were first class. And I would still be in contact with the head of youth development and also the head of youth recruitment. So it helps when you have good people. So they were really good people. So they would have said, say after the trial game, it would have been a simple conversation, maybe in the car to the airport, or maybe just even in the change room after the game, and just saying, like, here's what we thought you did well. Here's the areas of improvement, and we're going to invite you back over. Or I was also, had a conversation with, I went on trial with Sunderland maybe the season before that, and they didn't say you're coming back, but what they did say was, we'll monitor your progress. So I think that's always a watchful sign when people say they'll monitor your progress.
Mm-hmm. So then you actually sign for Hull. Talk to me about that.
Amazing. Life's dream. You've been told from an early age that you're good. People say that you're going to we think you can get a move, and so I suppose I just did enough in school to get by because I always had it in the forefront of my mind that I wanted to play football full time. So I actually remember sitting in science. So I was planning to do my GCSEs, and I think it was my phone kept on pinging, and I kept on putting it in silent. And on my way home from school, I had about 2 or 3 missed calls from the head of youth recruitment over there, and I rang and he says, just letting you know that we'll want to sign you. I went, right, walking home from school, sunny day in May, going, wow, going home and telling them, my mum and dad, and they went, yeah, well, no, we already got a phone call. So, but it was massive, big deal. So no, it was definitely a big deal at that time.
Of course, when you think about football and even playing at a local level, everyone's dream is to make it to that next level, and you were living the dream.
Yeah, no, 100%. It was, I think if I was to say to any of our young players at Crusaders, your school life and your academia comes first, but I suppose only when you're in that moment of, your early teens, your mid-teens, and you have a sniff of that, it's very easy to say concentrate on your academics when you're chasing something, and especially when you're involved in county programs and playing in milk cups and victory shields and trying to get into those Northern Ireland schools. These are like, the type of people that I was mixing with. We all had a common focus and a common goal, or at least the vast majority, and that was, to get a contract in England. So, at that time I was maybe playing with, a guy called Chris Ramsey, who's just signed for Lauren, but Chris, he got a move to Manchester City. Guy Kenny Hughes, he was from Green Island, he signed for Stoke. You had Corey Evans at Manchester United. You had Ryan McGivern at Manchester City. So you could see these people who were the similar age, but were a year older school-wise, so they were making the move a year earlier. So when you seen these guys that you were training with and playing with, it almost gave you, for me anyway, that sort of gave you, not the motivation, because that was naturally there anyway, but I suppose it gave you the inner confidence to go, well, if they can do it and if they can get a contract, then I think I'm good enough to get that also.
So what way did that work? So when you sang for Hull, was that a straight move over there? And then what sort of time did you have off, and to be able to come home and see your family? And
yeah, so I went over, I think it was the first Sunday in July. So GCSEs had literally finished, I don't know, maybe a week before, and bags packed, mum, dad, brother, young nephew, all waving me off at the city airport, and getting picked up by a guy called Frank Donahue was the driver, but he was more than that at Hull City, a great man, and he picked me up, drove me to my digs, and that was basically it. So the first week in Hull, that was on the Sunday. On the Monday, we did fitness testing at the university, and I think on the Tuesday we went to Dartmoor for pre-season, to the Marines camp for a week, and then that basically wouldn't go as far as a sink or swim moment, but you were definitely thrown into the deep end with people that you didn't know for a week, and then that's where bonds and camaraderie are built, especially if you're asking a group of 16, 17 year olds to go to the Marines for a week and they basically don't know each other. You're having to get mucked in. So that was really, really good times.
So what did you actually find of the standard? Because you were saying you were playing for Linfield and you were playing for the reserve team there. So when you went over to Hull and you were playing with fellas your own age, did you think that was a big step up, or was it the same sort of level?
Ability-wise, probably not. I think probably just the intensity of the training, and the standards.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. I think the professional game probably brings out the details in football. So in terms of the weight of the pass, communication, and just the all-around standards, I think that's the difference between, probably part-time football and full-time football is that this is your job. Yes, we are apprentices, but I was always taught when I went into the building, at Hull, that this was your job, and you had to treat it like a job, and if you wanted to make a living out of this game, you had to treat it in that manner. So that was drummed into us from day one when we signed our apprentices, that we treated this year like we were going to do 9 to 5. So we were doing an apprenticeship in football. I had friends who did apprenticeship as plumbers, as sparks, but what I was doing was I was putting the foundations into my game that hopefully would have allowed me to have a career in it and a living. So that's that's probably what the lessons that was learnt, early doors, which you probably wouldn't get, if you were just playing for an under 18s team back home, because you're only maybe training, twice a week, an hour at a time, and then a game on a Saturday. Whereas, we were going in there at 8 a.m, and we weren't leaving until 5 or 6, maybe 4 or 5 days a week. And then we were playing on a Saturday morning. We were off on a Sunday, and then you were going and doing that back round again. And we were given, basically jobs to do as well. So my job was to clean and wash the first team's water bottles. So every afternoon, after the first team went, we did our designated jobs. Some people did balls. Some people did had to clean out the first team change room. People cleaned kit. But mine was had to wash the water bottles. So me and another guy, we used to fill the bath with Milton and put the water bottles in, and then the next morning at 8 a.m, we used to go in, empty the water bottles out, and then hang them back up again for the first team lads. So again, that I suppose that was just instilling, of again those standards, and to probably just ground us as well. Yes, you've done well to get to this stage, but you haven't made it yet.
Yeah. Did you ever have any opportunities when you were at Hull to sort of mix with the first team players?
Yeah, some academies in England, have their first team training grounds and their academies separate. Whereas then it was just the under 18s or the apprentices, the first and second years, and the first team, they all trained at the same building. So you were mixing with, the first team, on a daily basis. Our training pitch was, literally 15, 20 yards away from the first team. So, people like Stuart Elliott, who played for St Andrews, Stewie was, he's a left-sided player. He did play for St Andrews. He went to the same church that my mum went to. And, I remember watching Stewie when he was, playing for Northern Ireland. So, like, I was having conversations with this guy that I thought, not that I would never dream of or only dream of, but I was going, this is pretty amazing. But I suppose it's like anything, it's pretty amazing then until you get to know the people and it becomes almost normal. So that was even from our first and say those first 2 years as apprentices. I mean, for example, the manager at the time was a guy called Phil Brown, and I mean, this wouldn't be uncommon, but every Friday, the under 18s, we would have acted as guinea pigs for the opposition that the first team would have played the next day. So, for example, if Hull City were playing Sheffield Wednesday at the KC Stadium, and Sheffield Wednesday played 4-4-2, and they like to play it out from the back, well, that's what we had to sort of reenact. So you're basically playing against the first team every Friday morning, which again, that was given, all of us, the opportunity to, put ourselves in the shop window to the first team management staff on a weekly basis. So again, just really, really good opportunities. And I suppose that came down to one, the manager, and two, probably the opportunity, because we were both in the same facility.
So when you were playing for Hull, were you also representing Northern Ireland at the time?
Yeah, so I went over there. I'd already been capped at under 16 and under 17. From there, during my time there, I was capped at under 19, played under 20s in the Milk Cup, which is now known as the Super Cup. Was called up to the under 21 squad 2 or 3 times, was maybe as a 17, 18-year-old, but never made my debut. Funny story actually there. Well, it's not funny, but Northern Ireland, I don't know how they managed to get the contract to have a live Sky game at Ballymena Showgrounds against Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd got called up to that squad, but it was, say, an international break, but Hull City were going to Dubai on a mid-season break. So there was 4 or 5 young players who actually got the opportunity to go to Dubai with the first team, and I think I was going to be going on that Dubai trip, but I called up to play for Northern Ireland, which again was amazing. It was great, but it turned out that the game got called off due to snow. So our game got called off due to snow, and I was getting messages and pictures sent through from my mates over in Dubai where we were our first team. So just the way it was.
Yeah, you could have been chilling in the sun.
Could have been chilling in the sun, whereas I was stuck in a hotel in Antrim with the game called off for snow.
So then, obviously, when your whole career was starting to come an end, could you talk about that?
Yeah, so I signed a 2-year apprenticeship, done quite well, signed a year pro, played probably the guts of 40 Premier League reserve games, and I was out the season I signed my pro. It was from 2010. Yeah, 09-010. So it was a really horrendous winter in Yorkshire, so it was, and the vast majority of the time our training ground was actually postponed or cancelled due to snow or icy pitches. So we started training on an indoor surface and also the 3Gs. And I developed basically stress fractures in my legs, which is basically shin splints. So I was told that I couldn't train, do nothing, in terms of weight burn. So the only thing I could really do was swim or run in the pool. So I missed about 6 weeks of football, and naturally, when that happens, other people have opportunities. So it meant then that I think maybe 2 or 3 of the younger boys who were in the under 18s had opportunities to play for the reserves. They did well. I was out injured. They got offered a contract and I didn't. So basically, the way that went, and it's pretty straightforward, but it was ruthless. At that time, Ian Dow had been given the manager's job. Probably, I think the nine games to go, and he was given the job to try and save Hull from relegation in the Championship. And a guy called Adam Pearson, who was a local businessman who had basically lifted Hull from obscurity, helping them to get the new ground at the KC from the old Boothry Park. He had come back in to help with finances, because I don't know the ins and outs, but I think they'd overspent, in their Premier League years. It was a conversation in the manager's office was, Nathan, thanks very much for everything that you've done at the club over the last 3 years, but there's no contract on the table for next season, so you're going to have to find yourself a new club. So that was as basic and as straightforward as the conversation went. And of course, you're left at that time. You've implored all this time and effort into your dream, and I suppose your dreams at that time, you almost feel as though your world sort of coming in around you. But so no, that was definitely a tough time. But the older you get, that's part of the game, and unfortunately, sometimes that's what you've I suppose at times I've actually been on the other end of that table now, and given that information, and it's one thing. It's certainly not an easy thing to do.
Do you think that there's more clubs can do for young players when they're letting them go?
I definitely think it's a topic of conversation at the minute. I know I've read a couple of articles on that. I think at the club, at that stage I had maybe 2 or 3 months maybe 2 months left on my contract. And I suppose, I've mentioned, the head of youth development, a guy called Billy Russell. I spoke with Billy on the phone. I met up with him in his office 2 or 3 different times, and talking about options. And and stuff. So, I mean, I can only speak from a personal experience, and I think, they did what they could do for me. The ultimate thing that I wanted for them to do was offer me another contract, and no matter what I thought or did, that wasn't going to happen. So, I suppose, they, I think by just sitting down and talking and here's the options. And, the one thing that when I spoke with Billy at that time, that, he'd been released as a young player, as well. And he had been through the process and how it felt, and what he went through. And, he ended up, he bounced back and had, a decent football league career and maybe made 600 appearances. So I think in always in those things, yes, the club can do something for you, but it probably does come down ultimately to the individual and how much they want it.
So when you got that news, what were your options?
Well, I had an agent at the time from London, and the reason why I had the agent was because, I had 6 months left in my contract at that stage, and I was going. The year before, there was maybe 4 or 5 of the first year pros were let go, and I thought, well, if that can happen to them, well, I think it could happen to me. So it wasn't a defeatist thing. It was just thinking about the future and trying to have a common sense approach to it. So he had got me I went home for, I went home for a week after I got the news. And during that week, it was actually during the time in 2010 when there was the volcanic ash, where there was no flights allowed to leave Belfast to England, or maybe vice versa. But he had got me a trial sorted with Yeovil. So I'd booked my flights to Bristol, and then I was going to get a taxi from Bristol to Yeovil, which is still probably probably 60 or 70 mile trip. But because of the volcanic ash cloud, the flight had actually been cancelled. So I rang this guy and I said, look, I don't think I'm going to make this. And again, this sort of shows the ruthless nature. I'm paraphrasing this here, that he sort of said, well, if you don't make your own way there, I won't be able to get you another trial. So, of course, I went on the other end and went, how can I get to Yeovil from Belfast? So, I think it's probably demonstrates how much at that stage that I really wanted to make it work and to become a full-time pro and keep going. So I had got a boat from Belfast to Stranraer, a train journey from Stranraer to Edinburgh, Edinburgh to Glasgow, stayed overnight in Glasgow, got the first train from Glasgow to Bristol, from Glasgow to Birmingham, and then a train from Birmingham to Bristol, and then a taxi from Bristol to Yeovil. Met up with my mate who'd also just been released at Hull City, and I think a travel lodge. Just literally arrived there at 3 o'clock. The kickoff was maybe at 6. Had a bowl of pasta and played the game. And funny enough, one of the guys who played in the game he was unknown from Arsenal at that time, was Luke Ayling, who's obviously went on to have a really, really good career at Leeds. So I think we played maybe a Conference South team. I think it was maybe Droys, or one of those teams anyway. During LH, I thought, I did reasonable enough in the game. Me and my mate went out that night, had a meal. He got a phone call on our way back up to Hull, more or less saying, thanks very much for making the effort to come down, and playing the trial game. Unfortunately, there's no spots here for you. Half an hour later, I also got the same phone call. So you made all this effort to try and make it work. Go from basically Scotland to the south of England, playing a game, and then within 24 hours you get that phone call saying thanks but no thanks. So again, I think that's sort of sort of, I think it probably gives you the impression that, you know, at that level of the game, it is fairly ruthless. And, you know, they didn't take into consideration, you know, the amount of traveling that I did the day before or anything like that. They were just looking at it and the cold hard light of day, and they were going, we just don't think that boy's, you know, going to make our first team now. And that was the conversation. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's obviously, from being over here, you hear so many stories of people who have went across the water and they've done okay, they've played well, but there's no place over there for them. Like I know in my own family on my uncle's side, you know, I don't know if you would know him, Scott Davidson, plays for Hardenwood Welders.
Yes, I played with Scotty as a kid and also played with him for a season at Arts.
Yeah, so I remember my uncle was telling me that he was over, you know, Liverpool were after him at the time, and so was Preston, but he decided to go to Preston because he thought he would have, you know, like a better chance of making it, just because Rafa Benitez was there and he was bringing over all the Spanish kids for the reserve team. So went over to Preston, and whatever happened, Sir Alex Ferguson's son took over, brought in a whole lot of youngsters from United. That pathway was blocked, and then it was just a case of, you know, being sent home.
Yeah, it's definitely. I don't think people. I think it's probably, you know, when I look at my, you know, role now and stuff, I think a lot of it is managing expectations, and that's for coaches, that's players, and it's parents. And I suppose, you know, my family, you know, they had never went through this process. I had never went through this process, but it was the older you get in terms of, you know, going on trials, being selected for elite teams, then, you know, that is ultimately that is the game. It does become about selection, and sometimes people are going to be, you know, elated, and sometimes people are going to be disappointed, and that's, you know, there's only ever going to be 11 spots in a starting 11. So, and there's going to be a squad of X. So there's always going to be people that are ultimately disappointed, and that's just that's just part of it.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of the game. So then, what was the next stage of your career? Like, where was it next?
Yeah, so I went on trial with Northampton. I also went to a thing called the Glen Hoddle Academy. So Glen Hoddle had set up an academy for basically people who had been released by clubs, and he was all sort of offering this sort of academy as a way of, you know, capturing people not to fall out of the game or just going to the amateur game. So had the option of going to that. Went a couple of times to his academy in High Wycombe, and then it ended up that he started the full-time academy in Jerez in Spain. But I had a phone call from Roy Walker, who was the manager of Ballymena at that time. He also played in a couple of guested a couple of times for Crusaders, and also guested a couple of times for Linfield. But I decided to go to Ballymena, and I was there for 6 months, and then I went to Linfield. But I think probably during those 6 months of Ballymena, Roy was unbelievable to work with. To work under, and there was another guy called Wes Gregg who was his number two, and Wes was a phenomenal coach. You know, just got people. Sadly, no longer with us, but really good environment. You know, and I suppose I was given the head and given the license to go and play, and you know, and I had people who trusted me, and I suppose that was reciprocal as well. And you know, a really good 6 months, you know, playing in a position that I always wanted to play, which was centre midfield. You know, I was allowed to go basically box to box and go and make things happen, and it was a really good time. And then say Linfield came in for me, Glentoran and Crusaders again, and at that time I think Linfield had maybe won 4 doubles out of 5 years, and I had that sort of connection before, and I knew the people, and for people who've signed for Linfield, or maybe more so signed for David Jeffrey, once he starts talking to you and selling the club, I suppose that was just to be fair, he just blew me away in the office, and to be fair, I don't even think he needed to mention anything about money or finances. It was just like I had my head and my heart sold on going to Linfield at that time.
What was that conversation like with David Jeffries?
I think he more or less just went, you're a carried boy who follow Linfield. He says you're young, you're hungry. You tick all the boxes in terms of what we're looking for. And to be honest, he probably didn't really even need to sell it. I went into Windsor and you turned right, and that's where the manager's office was. And I suppose it was just it was the thought of playing at Windsor, playing in front of, bigger crowds, playing in front of, big crowds and big two games. At that stage, I suppose they were so successful. It was, I suppose when I was looking at it, it was just a natural progression that's where I wanted to go and I suppose needed to go. And, it was, I suppose with David as well, he was so well known and is so well known. It was just he basically didn't have to talk. It was more or less that once he started talking, it was just, let's get this thing done.
Yeah, I remember a very, very long time ago when I was a lot younger, going to watch Linfield, and you had Peter Thompson up front with Glenn Ferguson, and then boys, you just score for fun.
Yeah, I mean, I never played against Glenn Ferguson. Sorry, I never played with him. Played against him when he was at Distillery, and I think at that stage, Spike would have been maybe, I don't know, maybe early 40s, and he was still like very, very good. I played with Peter, and it was just after Peter had come home from Stockport, and very, very good player. But I know I'd have watched Linfield as well, probably the clean sweep year and the year after, and they were obviously one of the best partnerships probably locally for a long time. I suppose you could say Spike and Thompson, Boyce and Gormley would maybe be the two that would be up there in terms of partnerships.
Mm-hmm. And what was your time at Linfield actually like?
It started off like a house on fire. Made my debut against Dungannon. Scored after 5 minutes. Played very well. That's it. I went in the January, so I think it's always harder going in mid-season to somewhere. But I suppose I have a hard set in Linfield, and whatever happened between the two clubs, they got it done then. But it was cup tied, so it sort of meant that I could never really get a rhythm together, because I was maybe playing 1 or 2 games in the league, and then once an Irish Cup game came, then it sort of knocked me off kilter as such. But I think my time in Linfield was probably mixed. I suppose, like I said a couple of other times, when people's asked me, you go to these clubs, to play, to earn your spot. You don't go for attraction. And I suppose at times I was more out of the team than in the team. And that was due to, a mixture of things, from form, injury, confidence. I thought I should have been in the team. I wasn't being put in the team. But all in all, I think it was a very good experience, because again, you were mixing with people who were serial winners. The likes of, mentioned before, like Winky Murphy. I played with Noel Bailey, Michael Galt, Jamie Mulgrew, Peter Thompson, Michael Carville, Robert Garrett, Damien Curran, Jim Irvin, Stephen Douglas. The names locally just, they just fall out. And all these people were they were competitive, and it was the way that change room in Linfield was that yes, you wanted the guy in your position to do well, undoubtedly, because it was for the team and for the club. But there was a dog eat dog mentality, and it was a competitive, just a competitive animal. Our training games on a Thursday night, much like the ones in Hull, David would have said that, if we were playing against, let's say, for example, the Crews, the opposition, let's say the reserve 11, some of those games on a Thursday night were of a higher intensity that you were actually playing on the Saturday, because, it was basically two players or two quality players for every position. So, it was a tough team to break into. But all in all, I think probably me personally, I would have liked to have played more games, but it didn't happen. But in terms of an experience, when you look back, after 6 or 7 years, you go, that was a really good experience, because it sort of sets you up, probably not for my playing, but more the coaching side of it, and going, how do you deal with not playing? How do you deal with a player who's lacking in confidence? How do you deal with a player who's busting his gut in the training, but I just can't get or find a space in this team for him? So no, it was all in all, it's really a mixed bag.
You mentioned confidence there. How important is it when you're heading into the game to have a lot of confidence? Because sometimes when you don't have that confidence, maybe performances aren't quite there because it's more nerve setting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's massive, and I think mentality and the psychological element of the game is huge. Especially at the higher level, because especially even in the Irish League, in terms of teams that are fighting against relegation, or teams who are going for the league. There's an expectation that especially at the bigger clubs, that you have to play consistently well, week in, week out, week in, week out, because it could come to the end of the season, which is happening in the Irish League in previous years, when there's, I think it was 2017, 2018, when the Crews just narrowly tipped Coleraine into the league, and I think it came down to either a point or goals difference, whatever it was. And you need people, or the manager needs people that they can trust. So that's what they're looking for, people who are going to consistently play all of the time. And so the psychological element of the game, you need people that you can, as I say, trust to take your message out there and basically perform it.
Yeah, I think another thing that probably people need to realise as well is that, when you're playing the Irish League, you're still only human. And, when you make a mistake, say playing in the Irish League or playing for one of these big teams, you could have hundreds of people on your back through social media telling you that you're rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that's a very, very hard part of the game, especially if, you're an individual who's always on their phone, who's always reading articles about the game or reading the comments, on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose that's probably been borne out more so maybe in the Premier League and all of that, where people are obviously getting abuse online and all that sort of stuff. But I think, if you're dependent on what others think and others say, then I suppose you might say that people maybe are, mentally fragile or mentally weak, in terms of if they can't handle, that sort of, that side of it never really says on me about people shouting on or saying anything online. That, I think that's just part and parcel, especially if you're going to play for, the bigger clubs. You're there to be shot at, and I suppose if that's, I suppose sometimes you can take that as leverage that you are actually playing for a bigger team.
So I believe when you were at Linfield, you won the league.
I was there for 2.5 years, and I think there was 2 doubles in those 2.5 years. Yeah,
That's some stat. So then, what made you move away from Linfield?
Well, much like the Hull one, as I say, I was a mixed bag. I don't think I played as many games as I should have, and there was a conversation between me, the manager, and I think maybe 2 board members, and it was again that you haven't played enough games, and I think at my age, I think maybe I was 22, 23, that maybe for my own personal development in terms of playing, that I needed to go out and play more games. So yeah, no, I left Linfield and then had, a few options, but I decided to go to Crusaders.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your time at Crusaders like under Stephen Baxter?
Brilliant. Still, a similar, still going for the same trophies as Linfield, but a different environment. Again, I wouldn't say less pressure, because the pressure was always, within the, to get results. But maybe just a different change room with different characters, and all in all, a really, really good time. And it ended up in 2014-15. We won the league, and Jay made a fair amount of appearances that season as well. And still there's people that are still here today in the playing staff, in the first team squad, that we're a part of that squad now, or we're part of that squad then. And I would still be in touch with maybe 4 or 5 others that have moved on or either retired and stuff. And I think if you stay in touch with people after X amount of years, normally there's been a really good bond sort of put together. So no, Crusaders was very, very good.
Do you think it makes a massive difference, when you're a lot friendlier with, maybe the person that's next to you? Do you think that helps you play better as a team?
Well, I mean, at Linfield it was every bit as successful, and I suppose just because there's a competitive element any club you go to, but I think it was just the way David had it, that if you've got the shirt, that's your shirt. Do not the only reason you're going to give that shirt back is if you don't perform, and then the next man was in. I'm not saying Crusaders was different. It wasn't, because if you did well, you stayed in. But it was just a different environment. I mean, the guy who was playing in my position was Craig McLean, and I mean, me and Craig would be, good friends. And I can honestly say, anytime Craig played, I wanted Craig to do well, and I think that was vice versa. So, it was just a different spin on the environment that was maybe set. So, but it was a really good, really, really good change room.
Mm-hmm. Suppose the other question I think people will probably find interesting is, obviously during COVID at the minute, there's been no fans at really any of the Irish League games for the past year. When you were playing, did you feel like the fans made a difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it sounds a bit of a cliche, but football without fans is nothing. And I've watched our first team play at home quite a number of times this season without fans, and it's definitely different. I watched our first team against Linfield on Saturday, and although we got beat 2-1, the game was end to end. It was competitive. The only thing, it was a really good advertisement for the Irish League, and the only thing was missing was the atmosphere of fans, to drive on the players. I think that was definitely the only thing that was missing from Saturday's game was the fans, because it was one hell of a game.
Yeah, probably the next thing that I think people would be interested in is just thinking about, like, when you're playing in the Irish League and the sort of the tactics that teams would use. When you're watching it from the sideline, you don't realise how much detail actually goes in. And I often use the example of, when Adam was playing reserve team football or playing for Moyole or whatever, how much detail was actually in that set of tactics. Like when you were watching it from the side, you didn't really know, what the manager was thinking. But when Adam was coming off, he was saying, like, the manager was saying that he wanted the wingers to tuck in to crowd the centre of the pitch. And, fans don't really see all that sort of detail that goes on.
Yeah, I mean, the work that goes behind the scenes in terms of, at Irish League first team level, from performance analysis, the GPS, to, someone going and watching the opposition the week before, you know, right down to the detail of, where to show people in terms of inside, outside, their set pieces. It's just far more than, just rocking up on a Saturday and watching a game of football or playing a game of football. There's lots of things that, go into it to make it all happen. But ultimately it comes down to the players, executing that plan. So there's all of that work that goes into it behind the scenes, and, picking teams and picking formations and the tactics. But ultimately, it's down to the players to perform that, to execute the plan as such.
Mm-hmm. When you were playing for Crusaders, did Stephen Baxter have one system that he played, or would you change it up depending on the team you were playing?
I think there was maybe an overriding way that we wanted to play in terms of a style, but I think it depended on the opposition. Some weeks it may have been at that time you had, a couple of different variations on centre forward. So in my first year here, you had Gary McCutcheon, and Cutchy at that stage was maybe 33, 34, and instead of maybe running in behind defences, he'd rather maybe picked it up in a pocket and say, in terms of where a number 10 would play. So instead of, Jordan Owens flicking it on to runners, he was maybe nodding it back to Gary McCutcheon. That was maybe season 2013-14. And then maybe just a natural evolution of that there was maybe the introduction of, or the emergence of Gavin White. So then you had, instead of maybe playing 4-4-2 or 4-4-1-1, then it maybe naturally went into a 4-3-3, because you had, two natural wingers, two natural flyers, and Gavin and Paul Heatley. So maybe the ball was played to Jordan Owens, and maybe Chicken was, instead of nodding it back towards, Gary, he was then maybe flicking it on. So you then had Gavin and Paul Heatley making runs from out the in. So they're making diagonal runs off Chicken's flick on. And then at that time, and still playing unbelievably well, is Declan Cadell, he was then winning what we would call the splashdown of the second ball. And then if their centre half did get a clean header and it maybe did go 20 or 30 yards back, then you had, one of the best passers of the ball in the Irish League, and Richard Clark, to recycle the play. So I think at that stage you had, all of the armory to mix it up. You could go direct to Chicken. You could play it to Paul Heatley's feet, or Gavin White, who'd be good enough to get out of fullback one-on-one. They either get a cross in, or if not, they could maybe set it back to either maybe a Craig McLean who's playing left back, or Billy Joe Burns, who had excellent delivery. So I suppose that's it. It's the options there that I think, especially then, that it probably was the opposition who probably had to change the way they wanted to play, rather than Crusaders having to change theirs.
Yeah, even from you talking there, you can see that there's so much actual, like the finer details in what you're saying, rather than just people thinking, you just pick a team and say you line up in a 4-3-3 or whatever. There's so much more detail actually goes in to that system than just picking players.
100%. There's, I think when you think about what the prizes are at the end of this year, in terms of winning leagues, winning Irish Cups, winning League Cups, qualifying for Europe, the opportunity, the likes of, I watched our boys, our first team against Wolves, and I was absolutely buzzing, for boys that I played with from no age, but I did sit, in the stand with a bit of envy, going, wow, what an opportunity. But the amount of work that I imagine, the first team management team had to put into, putting that plan in place to play against Wolves, especially at Molineux, in a big, massive pitch, they were just off the back of, I think, playing in Asia, and I think they played maybe a Newcastle or something like that and beat them 4-0. So that was like the analysis that they were working off, and then putting our plan in place to say, well, how's our first team going to, how are they going to come up against a Premier League team and put that in, and like they only come away with a 2-0 defeat and conceding the last goal in the last minute. Just goes to show you the amount of detail and tactical information that the first team management team had to then put into our players. And again, it's all well and good the coaches and the coaching staff putting that detail into it, but then it's over to the player. So obviously, to a man, our boys executed the plan right down to the minutest detail.
I remember being at that game. Albie's daddy is a massive Crusaders fan, so we managed to get tickets for it, and then you realise like how athletic some of those players are. Like Adama Traore, that man is a freak of nature.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I actually the first game against Wolves at Molyneux, I was coaching, so I didn't actually see the game live, but I think at the time it was Steve McManaman was commentating on it and radio, maybe in 5 Live, and they just kept on commenting on Adama Traore versus our left back Jordan O'Rourke, and Jordy, like if you watch the duels in that game, how well Jordy did, against him, was unbelievable, because in terms of, a complete mismatch in terms of, athletic profile, but Jordy coped with him, really, really well.
Well, I think it's even if you look at that Wolves team, you had Diego Jota, had a big money move to Liverpool, and then you had João Moutinho, Ruben Neves. It was all real big players. Jimenez, there was another one. It all turned out at Seaview to play.
Yeah, it was amazing. So it was a definite, definitely a big moment. So it was, and there was Wolves fans, everywhere. They were getting buses from the city centre. Upstairs in the McDonald's centre was packed in terms of the corporate tables. The tent outside was full. The Danny Hill suite was full. It was a really, really big thing and a big event. And but the most important bit was the actual football side of it. And I think the first team were excellent over the 2 games.
Yeah, I think someone who had a very good game was Jordan Owens. I thought he played extremely well. He won a lot of flick-ons and he held the ball up really well.
Yeah, if you were to ask anybody who's ever came against, Jordan Owens, was that an easy game? I think they'd be lying if they said yeah, because he's so, on the pitch and off the pitch, two totally different people, but on the pitch, in the air especially, I can never think of a centre half who's had an easy day, or at least one, easy headers against them. Even if they win a header, it's going to be, instead of it, maybe traveling 15, 20 yards, it's probably just going to end up 5 or 10 yards, and that gives your centre midfielders an opportunity to, to get further forward, to, as I say, win that second ball, which is a big part of the game in the Irish League.
And just moving on, I know that you came to Faith at your time during Crusaders. Do you want to talk to me about that?
Yeah. It was 2000, probably the process probably would have started in December 2013. My dad had just been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and my mum had been going to Whitewell for, I don't know, maybe 20 years. And I suppose that it sort of just, I remember actually when he first got the news, and I'd said to him that you've got to go and get yourself right. And you think about the hypocrisy of that, telling someone that they needed to get right, and I had no inclination of wanting to get and I say that not lightly in terms of getting yourself right, but saying to him, you've got to get yourself right. And basically, at that stage, there was a number of pastors and people from the church who would have did visits to members of the congregation, and I suppose maybe once a week, twice a week, people would have came to our house. And I remember I think it was about the 20th of December 2013. So we just got this news, and from basically the 3rd of December to the 20th, the guts of a month, we started in our house. Really, really, really weird time. Sad time, but weird, listening to sermons from the church. So in terms of maybe Pastor David Pearce, Pastor McConnell, watching DVDs, listening to the Christian music. It didn't matter what style it was. Listening to the choir music, and I suppose, unbeknown that I suppose it developed maybe a bit of a thirst for it. But I remember I was actually upstairs on the 20th of December getting a shower, and I remember listening to my dad repeating the sinner's prayer back to say the pastor Erwin Ray, and I just had the towel sort of drip around me on my bed, and sort of the tears just dripping down. And I think at that time it was, it wasn't like a eureka moment or anything, but just went, this is maybe something I might have to do. And then there was a guy who was also from Carrick, who'd been a friend, Darren Potts. I knew he went to the church, and for years he had been asking me back and forth to go to youth events and to go to this event and the other. And I suppose I always just made silly excuses why I couldn't go. And it was probably middle of February now, and instead of watching Sunday the 4 p.m. game on Sky, I texted him saying, "Are you going to church tonight?" And I went, and I think probably over a 6-week period, and I just every week when it came to that part of the service, when it was the appeal, and sweaty palms, heart rate increasing, and going, I just don't think, this isn't for me. The standard of this year, I don't think I'll be able to live up to it. I've got a decent enough life. I'm all right, and I think it was about ended up was the 31st of March, 2014. I got saved, and just happened to be on the 8th of April. So just shortly, about 10 days later, my dad passed away. So I think I don't think it's sad. I just think that was probably that was just the way it was supposed to be. That both, him getting, that news and him getting saved, and it just led to a path, say, unbeknown to me, that that was the time that I also got saved as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's amazing that both you and your dad got saved, and I think a massive part of your story is probably your mum's testimony. Seeing her going to church for the 20 years, or what you said there, just her going to church and her living the right way, or just seeing that relationship that she had.
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose, like, I remember going to, Whitewell as a kid, and hearing Pastor McConnell preach, and so I was brought up in the ways, and I suppose that was a big thing, that was always there, and I suppose anytime I did go to, I suppose, nightclubs or anything like that, I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong, it was good. I would never say that I didn't, but I suppose it just didn't really fulfill me or anything like that. And I knew there was always something there, and I think that probably came down to knowing that there was a God, and there was someone who loved me unconditionally, no matter what. So it was definitely a strange time, but ultimately I think it was a very good time as well.
Mm-hmm. I think just what you were saying there, it is funny how things work out. And I would know you on a personal level, and I know that then you met Rebecca at church,
Yeah, no,
and now you got married and you have a son. So it's funny how things work out.
that's amazing. I went in the church, and I suppose you had the big, you had the choir at that stage, and obviously still there, and um, as you do naturally, just said to Patsy, who's the girl in front of the choir, and we went down to uh, Springsteen's, which is down in Carrick, and met Rebecca, and that was basically it. And that's what now coming up to 7 years, which is yeah, it was when you talk about it, it is pretty amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Everything sort of had its own time and its own purpose.
Absolutely.
So I suppose the next question that I want to ask you then is, now you're involved in a coaching role. I know I'm missing out large parts of your career, but I am conscious that I don't want to keep you here all day. But now you're coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So how's that? How was the transition to that?
I think in terms of playing it, I probably moved maybe from club to club, and at that time, I'd started a degree in Jordanstown when I was 22, and it was a 5-year course, and I suppose I always wanted to get involved in football full time again somewhere, and it just happened to be that I put a post out on Facebook after I'd done a B license, and one of the directors at Crusaders had contacted me and said, would I be interested in doing my coaching hours? And I suppose, I think naturally it's just one thing has led to another. I came in September 2019 in a community role, and the guy that I was, Merv Montgomery, who was the head of youth, he retired last January, and I got interviewed for the job, and I got it. And it's been unfortunate with COVID, but it's a fantastic club to work for, and you're surrounded by really, really good people. So it's been very, very good so far, just bar the pandemic. But I think everyone's been impacted at somewhere or another bit.
Yeah, I know anyone who follows youth team football knows that Crusaders is normally one of the top teams in the country as far as youth development goes. They're always up there challenging for whatever league that they're in. I think it's normally National A. I'm not too sure if it's changed.
Yeah, we would have three of our teams would be in the National League. So you've got National League, you've got South Belfast up until under 15s, and then under 16, under 18, and under 20 level you've got Niffle, which is sort of the umbrella underneath the Premier League, really. So it's we've definitely got 240 kids, 240 boys. We've got 150 in our girls section. So you've got nearly the guts of 400 young people involved, which is fantastic. Because you're providing a pathway to the first team, and also a huge element of that is also the community end and the participation. So it's it's a big undertaking, but loads and loads of good people involved. In terms of just the boys section, we've got 60 volunteers who give up their time freely to give back into the young people, which without them this thing was it would never go, because you couldn't do it on just one person. So without the volunteers, youth football would there would be no game.
Yeah, I think something that's amazing is that when you're sewing back into these kids and you're helping them to also perform better, but also become better human beings as well at the same time. But eventually, whether they continue in football or they don't, but say they play for Crusaders first team, there must be such a sense of pride that you have, because that you've been working with that kid for so long, or just seeing what you've given into them and what they've also given to you in the club.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably use Gavin White as an example. I think he was maybe playing for Doyle, and he came at 17. Now I played with Gavin, so I certainly don't claim to be any part of his development, but there was a boy who was given an opportunity. You know, he played for the under 16s. He bypassed the 18s, played a couple of reserve games, and he was thrust into the first team. And you know, look what's happened there. And I think that's probably the beauty of football. You know, it's giving people opportunities that they might not have elsewhere. And you know, I think especially here at Crusaders, you know, if people are good enough, they're going to be old enough. You know, we've got a young boy there. You know, just one example of, and I think there is many more, but you know, just one young lad called Jack Patterson who made his first team debut competitively against Warren Point at the start of January, and you know, just over 15. He turned 15 on October 16th, and you know, became our youngest ever player to play for the first team, and you know, the second youngest to play in the Irish League since 2010. You know, so there's definitely talent there, and I think that's one thing that, you know, would like to make maybe more vocal, especially with our own kids, that if they're good enough, if they're dedicated enough, if they're committed enough, there will be opportunities there, because you know, the manager's shown that, you know, throughout the years, even when he first got the job with, you know, Davy McGowan, Stephen McBride, Chris Morrow, Colin Coates. You know, there's just four. You know, and then there was another couple. You know, another ream of, you know, Declan Cadell, Jordan Owens, and then Gavin White. You know, and hopefully Jack, you know, is the first of many that's going to come through over the next few years. But you know, we can provide the opportunities, but ultimately, it's down to the boys and down to the players, that you know, how much they want to put into it and how much they want to actually, you know, crave that success to try and get into that team. Because you know, the gap even in quality in terms of our first team, and even when I played here, that's only 6-7 years ago, is a massive difference. You know, even just athletically, and the profile of the players and how much, you know, they put into their training. And you know, our first team went 3/4 pro over the last, you know, 2 or 3 years, and you know, even the contact time is that the coaches are now getting with the first team players is maybe, you know, fourfold than it was before. You know, so the standard of the league is getting better. So if that's the case, then the young players are also going to have to improve and fill in that gap themselves in terms of doing their extras, whether that be strength and conditioning, you know, or pitch work, or whatever their individual plan is. You know, the club will always be here, and I think the manager will always play someone who's good enough. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the young boys.
You said about the improvement of the Irish League, and that's something you've really seen probably the last couple of years. I think probably it's obviously started a lot before this, but Lauren obviously have went full time. I think Linfield have went full time. The Crews of, like you said, 3/4 full time, and Glentoran. You know, everyone's starting to take football a lot more serious over here, and there's more money involved. And you know, you can see even that there's players from across the water who are starting to come over as well.
Yeah, I think maybe COVID has maybe, I imagine that's potentially made some of the moves for, you know, some of the older boys who played in England for a long time. You know, maybe made that transition back home maybe slightly earlier than they would have wanted, or what they had planned. But I think what you said, I think the quality of the league is definitely improved. And you know, if you've got nearly, you know, at the minute, you know, ourselves, Lauren and Glenn Turner, sort of those sort of full-time models, and you know, which is a quarter of the league. If you know, if Linfield are going full-time from next year, well, that's a third of the league, and you know, that's, you know, I think that's great, you know, for everyone involved in the league, that's the way we're going. And you're providing, you know, others in terms of even the support staff. You know, I root into the game full time. You know, so it's just not the players that improve. It's the things outside of that. You know, in terms of your S&C coaches, your physios, your coaches, maybe even performance analysis. So it's the package outside of just. It's not even just the package inside the playing staff, but it's outside of that as well. It's also improved, which is brilliant.
Mm-hmm. And can you see a massive difference with Crusaders going full time and the rest of the league? You know, just how you train and what else is going on behind the scenes.
Again, I wouldn't be privy to, you know, what others are doing, but I suppose I can only speak about, you know, and I'm involved in the youth, not the first team, but you know, I think definitely, you know, if you look at, you know, probably the stats in terms of distance covered, probably really even in the detail of body fat, because you're actually dealing with people who are full-time professionals, and that is their job. Like we do have people who also do work as well outside of their football at the minute as well. But I think probably this one goes probably right back to, when I first went away as an apprentice, and I think it's just standards, and it's just if all of our boys in terms of just their physical and athletic makeup, they just look like full-time professional footballers.
Mm-hmm. And I'll let you go with this as my last question for you. What advice would you give to young people that are coming up through now? Just in terms of, avoiding temptation. Like a massive problem in Shore Road is probably underage drinking. 13, 14, 15, 16. Going the whole way up. And how much of a detriment that is to maybe individuals who want to take football seriously.
Mm-hmm. I think simply, I think if it's football that you want to be successful in, I think you have to dedicate yourself to it. And that means sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice, whether that be, alcohol, or any of those things. That if you want to, make it as such, that there is going to have to be sacrifices. So I would say that, the one big thing would be dedication and commitment and hard work, and simply, grafting towards that goal. So that's what my advice would be. Not that it's groundbreaking.
Well, Nathan, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, mate. All the best now.
All the best, Nathan.
Cheers. Bye now.
Bye.